self-awareness is the message I just continue to keep pushing. Because only once we have that self-awareness will we really be in a situation to be able to make any sort of adjustment. And lacking that self-awareness, we're blinded. We have major blind spots. We've all got them to some degree. But the great thing about this model is it will say, well, if you are more like this sort of character, well, then these are the typical things that you're going to be focused on. And these are the things that you're typically not going to be focused on.
Today we have Pad with us. Pad is the originator of Team Me. He's an author, a speaker, and as well a success coach. Has worked over a number of platforms and has presented on stage with the International Coaching Federation. Pad is going to come today and share with us something of his system of thinking about archetypes, of who you are, where you are in this world, and how you show up with your skills, abilities, and talents. So Pad, welcome.
Hey, thank you, Johnson. Wonderful to be here.
Can you just give us a brief sort of idea of your background and what you do, Pad, please?
So my focus now is upon executive teams, where essentially we do a very rapid profiling service, which operates remotely and is able to provide insights to their leadership and management around aspects that they've probably had some awareness of, but were lacking the clarity to actually take any particular action regarding these matters. And so what we do is it's an educational thing, but more than that, it's very practical because the simple model that we use helps people to see themselves differently. And that in itself sparks a different kind of approach to a situation. And of course, you know, as most of us know, if we're stuck in any situation, it's the approach we're taking, which is usually the problem. It can be a matter of skills, it can be a matter of knowledge, but actually more than that, it is the way you show up.
And so that's in the corporate setting, but it also works in other settings, like you say. So knowing who you are and how you're wired and the way that you would react to things operates on a home level as well as on a leisure level. That would be right.
Yeah, absolutely. So I used to use this same model. In fact, it was developed working one-on-one with people. I would have individual coaching clients who were, have their challenges, come to me as a coach and say, how do I tackle this? How do I get to where I want to get to? And then I would very quickly be able to show how they naturally show up in a situation. And as soon as you see that, you think, well, no wonder I'm getting the results I'm getting. What do you do from that? Well, then you need to look at how else could you show up? And that's our starting point. So it did work with individuals. We saw some remarkable shifts and transformations in a very congruent way. And that's key to this. It's not being inauthentic. It's not fake it till you make it. It's really understanding that we have the abilities inside of us. And then how then do you show up to play your best game?
Sure. So today, we're going to do the individual journey or sense of where we are, especially in these challenging times that we've been in for the last couple of years. And then at a later point in time, we're going to come back and point towards the corporate journey and seeing how individuals intersect with each other in terms of performance. So Pat, just show us what you've got, if you will, please.
Yeah, let me do that then. So the resilience code is what I like to call it when we are dealing with the challenges that we're facing, and knowing our specific code, our specific way of tackling challenges. And with that, why sometimes we just can't seem to break through. And so what I do is to take the same essential model that explains what makes us tick, what makes us show up the way we do, in order to say, well, from a resilience point of view, how does that actually play out for us? And so the first lesson of resilience that as I've looked over the years at why people are stuck where they are, why do certain things undermine them and cause them to fail? Actually, the first challenge is one of flexibility. It's what it boils down to. And so what we've realized is, yes, capability is important. If you're a pro tennis player, you have to have skills, you have to have capabilities, both mentally and physically, in order to be able to deal with the challenges that your opponent is throwing at you. And every one of us, whether it's a personal situation or professional situation, challenges get thrown our way all the time. And when that's happening, it's all down to whether we can handle the challenge that comes our way, and in tennis, bat it back and give them a problem.
Yeah.
It's not just capability, though. It is your flexibility, the ability for you to tackle things in a different way. So if you have a great strength with your forehand, but are useless with backhand, when you're thrown a shot that needs a backhand response, it's going to floor you. So this, you need the capability, but you also need to have the flexibility to be able to move to a different approach in order to tackle a challenge. Does that make sense?
So in terms of flexibility, so I might come to you and say, well, Pat, obviously I'm flexible. And I think a lot of us may say we're flexible, but how do you actually know that someone is flexible? And to what degree are we flexible?
Yeah, so I will look at any challenge that an individual has and then start to say, well, then let's try and characterize your response. And then this is where, from the desire for flexibility, we actually lead through to a different way of approaching it based, and you used this word earlier, on archetypes. Can I just sort of stamp this point and get a bit of a foundational understanding of archetypes, and then we'll see what these characters can help us do. So an archetype, I often say, if you're studying archetypes for the first time, don't put them into Google. You will get completely confused because lots of people have different ideas about what archetypes are all about. Everything that I do seeks to bring things down to a point of clarity and simplicity, and I try and keep things as simple as possible. Let's just go back to the etymology of the word archetype. Well, the arc bit refers to two things, actually. Ancient, like archaeology or the archives. It's the old stuff you're looking at. So it's really quite important that we're looking at something which is really old here. It's been established forever, but it also has a sense that it's still present with us today. So it's also the original. So, when you talk about the archetypes, we are going back to an original form, the original type. So you've heard of prototype. Prototype is like the first, but the archetype has this sense of being the first, but it's old as well. It's ever present. But it's also like the over and above. You go under an arch, don't you? Because it's over and above you. So there's that sort of sense to it as well. But a type then is a fixed pattern or form. So a typewriter was the very first writing implement that would give exactly the same shape to every single letter every time you typed it. And so a type is a fixed form, a pattern that is repeated over and over and over again. So that's what we're ultimately dealing with archetypes. Well, how does that refer to personalities and characters? Well, we've developed this Team Me model, which is based upon 6 universally recognized character types. And these cover off left brain characters and right brain characters, but we're only dealing with 6 of them. And so it's a simple enough model to get your head around, but also you'll recognize that these are characters that appear in pretty much every myth, every story that you've ever heard to some degree or another. And when I'm speaking to primary schools, I almost always bring up the Lion King. I just say, this one tick, this one tick, this one tick. You've got all 6 of these characters as the primary 6 characters of the Lion King, sometimes with 2 people being the jester rather than 1. But these are the key characters. They cover off areas of taking direct action, taking command, having the knowledge, seeking connection, and the people side of things, the desire for transformation, and the desire just to enjoy life. Once you know the strongest characters that drive your life, then you can actually begin to predict the behaviors of yourself, but also then of other people in any situation. So those are the archetypes that we work with.
Very, very useful, I can see. So even just looking at the diagram on the screen there, it points to different archetypes with I guess a stronger focus on, like, you've got the present, future, or past. Just MO refers to motivation. Would that be correct?
Yeah, motivation or mode of operation. It's a bit of both. And it takes a little bit of unpacking to understand that. But it's interesting that you're beginning to identify here that between the kind of left brain divide with the right brain, you know, the more rational and logical approach versus the more emotional and the kind of out of the box creative sorts, there is actually a tie between certain characters. There are these strings of passion between the what we would call the warrior and then the lover character, strings of perception between the sage, the one who's focused on knowledge, and the jester who's focused on enjoyment. And so there's this, when I saw these connections between them, I suddenly felt that we have a complete model here, that pretty much, whilst we could subdivide archetypes into thousands of them if you wanted to, but when it comes to the personality, the simplest thing is to say, let's work with 6. This is why they cover all the bases that they do. And we can unpack that further.
Excellent.
So if I press on with that, I will then give special names to each of these characters. The sovereign is the king or the queen, and they're ultimately the ones who set the agenda. They're commanding, they're the boss. The warriors are the ones that drive action, and they don't always, you know, make the initial decision. They will follow what the sovereign has to say. So the sovereign gives the command, the warrior is the one who implements. The sovereign's the one who establishes the boundary and says this is it, and then the warrior is the one who enforces the boundary. So they very much work together. All of these characters actually work together. The sage then is the intelligent one, the Sherlock Holmes or the Mr. Spock type, or the Velma from Scooby-Doo, the one who's just always looking at the facts. Forget the emotion, look at the facts. The mystic is the one who's innovative and seeks to transform and transcend a situation, transcend to get a higher perspective, transform to see it become something new. They're the dreamers who say, wouldn't it be wonderful if? The lovers are just that's not just the Romeos and Juliets of the world. They're the people who care about people. And then the jester, last of all, is there to make life fun and to enjoy, to bring entertainment and laughter and variety. So those are the 6 key characters that we have. And even as we're saying this, some of those will be attractive to us, and some of them will be, I don't get on with that sort of person. And that's just the way life is.
So almost in a sense, you're saying that there's maybe something of all of these in all of us, and so it depends on the mix.
Yes, absolutely. And so this, I find where you do these personality tests, and there's thousands of them out there, and they've all got some helpful insight. But anything that's trying to label you as just one single type is missing the point, I feel, because we're all a mix of all of these characters. And in any situation where things are being demanded of us, we will step up to a certain degree. We can flex and step up to that. Can we step up enough is often the question, and with enough of that required character. Because it's not so much the skills that we need, but can we adopt the character type necessary to get that job done? And sometimes the job done is forcing it through like a warrior. Sometimes getting the job done is to empathize more effectively with the person. So that's where the lover will come in. So yes, we've all got something of these characters within us, but they will always be more of some and less of others. So understanding these characters to some degree will help us to understand what's steering our decisions, what's steering our perspectives. And then once we understand that, we can be more effective in the behaviors that we present to the world. So to sum that up, facing any sort of situation, each of these archetypes will naturally focus on different things because there are certain values that are driving them. So the sovereign is going to tend to look for control and order, and anything that is disrupting that, they will want to deal with. Anything that's slowing down a warrior is going to be something they want to get out of the way, and they just, it's like, well, tell me my mission. What's my mission? What's the end goal? The lover doesn't care so much about the end goal. As far as the lover's concerned, the value is, oh, no, I don't care about the end goal. I just want to make sure that we're all together and we're all loving and in harmony and all connected and there's no conflict between us. The warrior's like, I don't care. Like, if it needs conflict, I'll bring conflict. And so each of them values different things, and so they focused on different things because of that. Can I then explain that as once you know your dominant characters, you can all those in your family or your team, you can then begin to predict what each of these characters will do when the pressure's on. And we are talking here about what we call shadow archetypes, but they're quite important because any challenging situation will have something of this mix in there. And if the sovereign, for example, is facing a challenge, and really it means their needs are not being met. If their needs are not being met, they will flip into a specific archetypal state because they're dominantly sovereign. They're going to go there. Same for the warrior, the sage, the mystic, the lover, the jester. And so we've got names for those characters, and the sovereign can easily become the tyrant. Control is a healthy thing for the sovereign, but if their needs are not being met, they overdo it with control, and they up it to such a degree that they control everything. With the warrior, it's the savage or the bully, which is just force is how you get things done as a warrior. But if you just go around in slapping force all over the place, people are going to get hurt. They don't care. Not at that point, because their needs are not being met. They're not considering other people. So you see that each one of these characters has the ability to flip into that state when their needs are not being met. If they are crushed by a situation, okay, I could give details on the top of each one there. If they're crushed by a situation, you equally will see them flip into a frozen state. So rather with the sovereign, so we've talked about control being their primary issue. If they are completely crushed, and this often happens when they've given it their best shot, they've done the very best they can and they've still failed, they implode. I think we've all in our own lives had times where we've just gone, I'm just falling apart, just sometimes just for a minute, sometimes for a day, sometimes for a few months. When we hit burnout, we've given it our best shot, it still fails to tick the box, hit the mark, and we just implode for a while. This was seen in Gladiator, when Maximus gets on a horse, wears that one out, gets on another horse, wears that one out, trying to rescue his family down near the Mediterranean, and he gets there too late. And he is the archetypal warrior general. And what does he do at that point? He completely gives up, and he actually becomes a victim at that point, and becomes a victim of the whole circumstance. He just quits and ends up being taken in as a gladiator because he stopped making decisions and he's let other people rule the show over him. So that was the implosion. And then of course we see him rise up bit by bit after that. So we've got this detail available to us when we know our own archetypal characters. We also know others. And so the key point here is to only when you know this map will you really be able to recognize your weaker points, and only by being honest with that can you actually map a path to resilience. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And yeah, hopefully it's a simple enough model to say, if I'm strong with these characters, and there's a way to quickly measure where those are with you, I'm then more likely then to swing into this problem or that problem going forward.
So it's firstly from your archetypal patterns is being aware of who you are and what your likely responses are based on which one of these, or which is your dominant one or two or three, maybe, whatever the mix is. So the sense of awareness is key from what I get for your coming back to flexibility and resilience. So
Yeah, absolutely. So self-awareness is the message I just continue to keep pushing. Because only once we have that self-awareness will we really be in a situation to be able to make any sort of adjustment. And lacking that self-awareness, we're blinded. We have major blind spots. We've all got them to some degree. But the great thing about this model is it will say, well, if you are more like this sort of character, well, then these are the typical things that you're going to be focused on. And these are the things that you're typically not going to be focused on. Please be aware of those. And I often do, because they're blind spots. I did this with a company recently, and one of the guys came back and says, this just isn't like me. Everybody else on the team went, oh yes it is. And I've been like that sometimes. I've almost been offended by certain personality profiles, like, how dare you say that about me? And I've thought about it a week later and gone, yeah, I am a bit like that, aren't I? So
I guess that's key, isn't it? Firstly, to know who you are, know thyself, and then to be able to be at a point where you can reflect on what that is, situations, or who is it, or why have I, and a lot of that is built in. Do you think that's built into a level of maturity, shall we say?
I think it is. There's maturity is a great word for it, because having that ability to look at yourself and honestly face what you see in the mirror is a wonderful trait. And without that degree of self-awareness, people find it difficult to get on with you, to be honest, because you're just refusing to face up to the way that you present yourself to others. And only by being aware of it first, and then having the willingness to say, well, I can see now how being that way in this situation may not be so helpful for people. And you can get away with that for a while, but especially if you're moving into a place of leadership, you can't not address these issues at some point. Or you're going to get yourself stuck in a rut, or you're only going to surround yourself with a certain type of person, and it is going to limit your impact and your effectiveness.
I guess it also limits your creativity on a personal level, as well as on a team level. If
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So creativity demands that you think outside the box. It demands that you pull in things from different places. The mystics are very good at doing that, but they're not always good at pushing it through to completion. So they need to work with others in order to make that happen. You can get some people who are mystic warriors, and that's great, but they may be lacking in the connection with people. So having that awareness of where we're strong and where we're weak will really give us an understanding. First, to appreciate, and what I found with both individuals and with teams, with certain individuals that I've done this with, the first thing is this big sigh of relief. It's just like, that's why I do things the way that I do. And rather than judging and hating ourselves for it, it's like, appreciate it. But there's a lot of wonderful strength in all of these characters. There is a mature and healthy and strong state for each one of them. There's a purpose for each one of them. But you don't always need the warrior to make things happen. You don't always need the sage to bring in the numbers. There's a time for that. It may not be the very first thing, but our tendencies are something we do need to develop our awareness around, so that we just know where we naturally go. And then we sometimes then can decide, well, who else do I need to move this forward? Or in a personal relationship, okay, that explains why this fellow is constantly finding me difficult, because I turn up this way, they turn up that way, and of course we're going to be clashing over this. We're going to say, no, this is more important. No, this is more important. And so we struggle. But just bringing it up brings in self-awareness, and then respect is kind of a natural way of doing it. And the great thing about these little characters, because they look like mythical characters, people are more willing to own them than some sort of label that can be slapped on us by other models.
That's really important, that the idea of not slapping a label either on myself or on you. because with that, the almost instinctive piece to all of us, I think as humans, is you get into this shame and guilt cycle,
Yeah.
where it's, oh, I've done that wrong again, and it's negative and it's negative, and you can spiral down very quickly, or you, without this awareness of, well, let's say I don't like Pad because Pad's a X and I'm a Y. Not that I do, Pat, but you know what I mean.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
you tend to keep a certain archetype away. And that, like you said, if you're moving in up levels of corporate responsibility, the more, and that comes back to the flexibility piece, the more flexible you are in one understanding, but to the application of this system, the more likely you are to achieve something much greater beyond your present.
Yes. Yeah, very, very true. So should we look at a few individuals' profiles and actually break this down a little bit more? Because I've got some examples which may be really helpful in helping to explain this.
I think that'd be really useful. Yes.
So we've got a few different examples here. And the first thing that we've sort of mentioned this, but let's emphasize it. What is being demanded of you in any situation will be a key factor in terms of this whole matter of resilience. I mean, if nothing's demanded on you, there's no need for resilience. You don't need to keep pressing on and continuing in the light of resistance of some sort. So the first question is, what's being demanded of you? Does it call upon your strengths? If it does, you probably don't have much of an issue with resilience. But if it's demanding traits that are poorly developed in you, then that's most likely where you're going to find the challenges. So with this particular character, Michael, we have quite an even profile here. What you can see, we've literally just measured 0 to 10, the strength of each of these characters for Michael. Ran him through a very quick survey, and out comes this response. Now, this is a fairly even response, and so we're not seeing any particular area of weakness here. But there's a few things that we can deduce from looking at a profile like this, because even small differences between characters does give us an indication of how they show up, and where their values are steering them and their behaviors in any situation. So the first thing that we can say here is ultimately Michael's a bit of a dreamer, but they ground themselves with factual insights. This is interesting, that they're very astute and they're willing to look at the numbers. They're not just off in dreamland, but actually still the mystic there is the highest of these characters, a little bit magical, a little bit dreamy, and their imagination is going to be their primary driver. But interestingly, with Michael, he then balances this. This often isn't the case with people who are strong with mystic. He's balancing that with the sage, which is going to be looking at facts and numbers. What do we know is true? Where's the evidence? So this sort of person is probably loves reading myths and things, but also then starts analyzing to start saying, well, then, is anything of this true in the real world as well? And so that's an interesting balance between right brain and then left brain characters here. But also then there's several other characters leading there. The lover's only just one step below, and the jester. So you've got these two voices coming in saying, let's make sure that everybody's getting along, and let's make sure this journey is fun. After that, only a few steps down, but it's interesting that this is the way that Michael's mind is going. Only after that does he start thinking about structure and driving things forward. So what we've got here then is really, I would say this is a humble leader profile. It's a leader profile in the sense that he has the adaptability, the ability to go to almost any area. Everything is just about within a range of 1 on this chart. And that shows that there's no real huge dominance that is going to swing them one way, or huge deficit that's going to cause them to implode some other way. But they actually have the ability, if a warrior starts talking in the conversation, they can go to that conversation and they can meet them at that point. Whereas if it was so much lower, they actually find a hard time talking to warriors. And we'll look at that in a moment. So, but I also say a humble leader profile, because you do one of the things that we find about these charts is that there are some people that just don't they don't over-aggrandize their own capabilities. They actually score it in such a way that shows a degree of humility. But the fact that we've got this balance here indicates to me leadership. But the fact that it's a little bit lower, because I did one guy recently who's actually an MP, and everything was over 7. Most of them were 8s and 9s, and some higher than that. But they were all really very balanced. And so he's a full-on character, lots and lots of energy, but he has the balance and the ability for me to think he's ambitious, but he's caring about people too. So that actually, to me, gave me some confidence about that. But this fellow is also doing a huge amount in the real world, but he has a certain amount of humility in there as well.
So
what I will emphasize,
I just stop you a sec there, just to clarify for anyone listening. These charts are self-scored. So in the sense that you've given Michael as an example, and you're saying most of the scores range between 4 and just over 5. Yeah. Whereas the other example you've given was somebody who is scoring 7s or 8s maybe. And yeah. So because they're self-scored, it gives you an additional piece of information.
Yes. Yeah. So it's one of those things that I usually use these to start conversation, and there's a degree of diagnosis in them, but I also really, ultimately, the value in them is the conversations that they start and where those conversations go in a coaching context. That's the more important value. But when I'm doing remote work, especially with teams, I'm having to extrapolate interpretations that I don't know the people, I don't know their situation. So I'm going in very, very cold, and all I've got is the numbers.
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, I was working with an NHS team last year, and I hadn't met a single one of them. And the first response I had from the leadership team was, "You said this would be accurate." It was extremely accurate. And then a week later, they said, we've noticed the reduction in conflicts on the team just by pulling these things together. So that's a relationship thing, because as soon as we start working on ourselves, it does impact the people who are closest to us, whether that's personal relationships or work relationships. It can't not have an effect of some sort. So just pressing on with Michael's profile, notice that if there's a weakness with this character, then it's a slight potential for hesitation around taking total responsibility, the sovereign, or direct action, which is the warrior. But it's very slight with Michael, really is very slight, and so not a great concern, but something to be aware of. It's not where his mind goes first. If then I jump onto Leslie, who is very strong with warrior and weaker with the others, and we can extrapolate different things. First of all, Leslie is a demanding action taker, who then, because the sovereign is next in line, values structure and order. And third, the lover, interesting that we've got the lover there as the first of the right brain characters balancing her profile out, values team, values people. But you see that the warrior is significantly higher. So if there was a crunch, she would say to the people around her, well, you're either with me or you're not. I'm doing this. And if you're actually not actually with me, then get out of my way. Mm-hmm. But at least the lover's not like down at a 2 or something. It's still high on her agenda. But the warrior of progress, the warrior drive of progress is her highest desire, followed by the sovereign, which is progress, now order and structure. And then, okay, team are going to make this happen, so let's make sure the team is good. After that, the jester kicks in, let's make this fun. After that, the sage comes in, ooh, remind me, do we have facts and figures and numbers backing this up? And last of all, it's the innovation, okay, what do we need to do to make this dream happen? But she actually won't go to the mystic unless the others are not providing the answers. Because as far as she's concerned, you get the answer by continuous forceful progress within structure and making sure the team's with you. So do you see that that's immediately what we can understand? She's driven and ambitious, but she can also be quite warm with those who are on her team. If you're not on her team, you're probably out of her vision, outside her vision completely. But where does she hesitate? Imagination and hard facts. If they hold the key to success, she probably won't see that very quickly. And she needs others on the team to raise their hand and say so. Her initial response will be, yeah, I don't care about that. But if the other things are not working, then she'll consider that. So do you see the way that this can unpack for any individual?
So can I just clarify with you, Pat, here? So you've got the warrior who's up at a 7, and then you've got the idea that in a situation where things are going well, that person would be driving and driving and driving. So clear focus, clear direction, let's keep moving. And are you guys with me? Yes, okay. Therefore, I don't need to consider alternatives. I don't need to explore alternatives. We're moving forward.
Right. Absolutely. Yes.
And then there's order, and we can make it fun along the way, but let's keep moving forward.
Yes.
And the difficulty may arise when things don't, the situation changes. So to get to the point of where your jester and the, sorry, not the jester, the hat, the learner,
the mystic,
sorry,
yeah,
the mystic comes into play. That takes a little more awareness of the situation.
Yeah, so it's a willingness to be flexible, to consider another perspective. And the warrior can find this really difficult because, first of all, especially if the sage is strong, they're not only convinced they're right, they're just going to keep pushing forward in that direction. Sages are always convinced they're right, because that's what they pride themselves on, accurate diagnosis of the information. And if you, so with this lady, that's not so strong, thankfully. So maybe there's a point of persuasion here, but still to get the warrior to sit down and listen to another viewpoint can be quite a challenge, especially since there's such a gap here, almost a gap of 4 between the warrior and the mystic. If the mystic starts saying, I think we need to actually spend a bit longer dreaming about the future and what that is, the warrior's just gonna be like, that's just dreamy, woolly, I don't care, I don't do woolly stuff, go away. You know, but if things are failing, the warrior will tend to flip into their shadow state. Their needs are not being met. They'll tend to go with the way of the bully, the savage, when actually the solution may be down with the sage or the mystic. And this is where, as a leader, this would be a tough woman to follow. Yeah, if she's a manager or a leader, she's going to have her way of doing things. And yet this insight can then start to say, well, actually, you do need to allow time for these voices to be heard. And then you weigh and assess them, great. But be aware that your tendency will be to refuse those voices initially. But they're not like through the floor. They're still, you know, over 3, both of them. So there's a degree of strength and maturity there. It's not that she can't go there, but she tends not to. If it's like 1.5 or 1, then they rarely ever give that voice any credence at all.
If I can just interrupt you a sec there, Pat. So Leslie Reynolds, in pandemic times that we're in, how does that person deal, do you think, with the resilience of the situation that we're in?
So as far as Leslie's concerned, the solution is always taking action. Faster, better, consistent action. And then we'll be saying, so what are the skills that I need to maintain in order to continue to do that? So imagine you're in the special forces. You need to continuously train with the weaponry and with the skill sets and with the body fitness and the mental agility and all the rest. You work on those things so that when you hit the coal face, when you get into the mission, you don't have to think about those things. You've already prepped yourself. So warriors are good at discipline and preparation and loyalty to the cause, but they're also going to be pretty blinkered and focused on that mission. And if they don't, what they will assume is they've just got to work harder to make this thing happen. Work on themselves, sharpen the saw, and then just go at it and cut it, go at it and cut it. Do not relent. Keep going, keep going, keep going. And it may work. But if it doesn't, they could implode. And if they implode, well, where else are they going to go? And that's the question. Whereas actually, if they had learned to develop the perspectives across these other profile types, they could have said, well, actually, maybe moving to this viewpoint will give me some insights. So let me just take some time to go there, put myself into that mindset and look at my situation from that perspective. I wonder if that'll help me. As soon as it does, they'll probably swing back to warrior to make it all happen again. But at least they've had the opportunity to see things from a different angle. Or they could just end up going off the cliff with their great speed and force, which is no help to anybody.
Yes, thank you for clarifying that.
So I'll do one more example.
Yes.
Now, this is an interesting one because we've got even more of a difference here between the driving archetypal character and some of the weaker ones. And so if anything's under a 2, it's a notable weakness. And here at 1.5, we know that you can see the warrior is really not well developed with this character, and the lover's up at an 8. Really, really dominant, and a few others bobbing around in between. So dominantly people-centered. Lorana is definitely a people person, but the next 2 things that come on in, they do look at the facts and they do look at structure and order. So, but they're almost half of the strength of the lover. So as soon as they've dabbled around in facts and order, their tendency would be, okay, I probably want to get back to that connecting with people. And that certainly would be the case if they are down in warrior land where they're having to actually get something done. They're very quickly going to run out of steam and want to swing back to connecting to people again. So you see these cycles and these loops taking place with people. And the greater the difference, the more likely they are to find that pull back to their dominant character type. A couple of other things about Lorana then, I would call her a caring manager type of person. This person actually is in management of the NHS, of a department there. And so people is definitely their primary character type. But they do need to be aware that, yes, they can bring in structure and order, so good as a manager. They're prepared to look at the numbers and the data, which is also very good. In fact, that's even higher. So that's good that they're not divorced from reality. They also want to make sure things are fun. That's the next place that they go to with the jester. After that, they'll start dreaming up new ideas about how to make things better, but it's not their go-to place. Yeah, and even between the mystic there, even though they're all right brain characters here, the mystic, the lover, and the jester, it's still the connecting with people in the present moment as well. Do you remember our first diagram? The present moment is actually the driver for the lover. And then last of all, they'll go down to the warrior, but they can't stay there for very long before they find themselves wanting to get back up to the people themselves. So Lorana will hesitate where direct action is required and where she's less able to innovate and dream up better solutions, generally speaking. Yeah. So those are important, but I want to bring in one final dynamic here as well, because we've talked about the strength as a strength. But of course, as you well know, in any psychology, your greatest strength can, in certain situations, be your greatest weakness, not just because it's inappropriate, but also because it has a kryptonite factor, that you can trip up any one of these characters with one specific bit of kryptonite. Yeah, so Superman was always Superman, but in the presence of kryptonite, it would drain him of all of his power. Just one little mineral. Well, we've all got the kryptonite factor in our own lives. So our greatest strength can become our greatest weakness. We need to be aware that each of these archetypes has not just a shadow state of overheated and frozen, but also one thing that if a certain need is not met, it can completely floor us. And this here is for the lover, that is the key kryptonite factor is disconnection. And if there's a major disconnection in her life because she craves connection more than anything, she can flip into grief. So when I'm dealing with somebody, you don't go there straight away because it becomes almost a therapy matter here. But you say, okay, so the times in your life when you've really felt the most undermined or devastated, and then I can predict it for each of these characters. For the sovereign, it's when they lost control. Yeah. And for the lover, it's when they disconnect, and that's when they are overwhelmed with grief. And they may get over that pretty quickly, but actually the stronger the lover is, the harder it is to get over that. They desire connection, they crave connection. So those are some of the things that we also need to be aware of with, and the great thing is the profiles reveal this very, very quickly. As soon as you start learning to interpret the profile, you can very quickly read somebody's character back to them, emphasize their primary strengths and their weaknesses and what that means in the real world, and how they've been living their lives and how they make the decisions the way they do.
Yeah, so that's what is interesting to me from what you said here is when Loran would be in this point of disconnection. So correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's not just that the fact that you're disconnected. It might be the length of time that you're disconnected for, or the strength of the relationships that have disconnected.
Yeah.
Would those play a part in this character's profile and how this character would react in that situation?
Yes, exactly. So how meaningful is the relationship? And then, well, if a disconnection has occurred, whether it's just a physical separation, but they're still talking on the phone, they'll still feel that. But if there's been a complete disconnection, it's all in degrees, of course. But for the warrior, a disconnection of a person moving away, it's just like, yeah, happens. Yeah. You know, it's working with them, not working with them, working with other people now. So, and sometimes in relationships, they even feel the same. Even significant relationships, they look at it the same way. It's like, yeah, I was with that person, now I'm with this person. Just move on. So what? You know, it's progress, and I'm continuing towards my mission, and it just doesn't come into their radar. Whereas the lover is just like, oh, that person 35 years ago, I'm still feeling it. You know, so you can navigate accordingly. But yeah, those are some of the key points.
And the other thing that comes to mind again from the resilience and the current framework of where we're living is the idea of there's a physical connection, and then there's as we are now, a true tech connection. There's nothing physical in this, not in the sense of I can't reach out and touch somebody's hand like the song.
Yeah.
And that has an impact as well, I would imagine.
Well, yes, it does. And so those people who are who need people around them are finding the remote working difficult. And again, with the remote profiles, then yeah, I'm able then to say, okay, so these are the people that are finding this most difficult. These are the ones that need this. These are the ones that need that. Whereas, you know, if they're strong on Sage and Warrior, they're going to have less of an issue with this current working situation, as long as they're clear about the mission. And as long as they've got the facts that they need, they'll pretty much hunker down and get on with it. Maybe too much. Maybe they're disconnecting too much because its connection just isn't that important to them. Whereas for the lovers, it's like, no, I've got to have that people contact. And that's the oil that makes it all work for me. And yes, then I can get on my job, but they have to tick their lover box first. Then they can go to the taking action and looking at the numbers and everything else. So, you know, job satisfaction is very clearly mappable in that sense.
And how do you see that in terms of crossed different areas of your life? So, for example, if that last one you showed really needs the lover sort of connection, the people piece, and if that's my need and I'm not getting it at work, can I then take it from a different tank, so to speak. And I go home and play with the kids more, or pet the dog, or whatever it is that gives me that sense of connection, and then bring it into a different world. Does that work that way?
Yeah, you can actually do that. And so the question is, very often, I'll often do a comparative profile, and I'll say, so who are you when you're in your natural state? And that's how most people answer the surveys. But then I'll also say, okay, so at work, now go through the same questions and say, in that work situation, and it's all questions about how you show up. And it reveals the values that are driving that. And since different things are demanded of that individual in a work situation, they will respond differently to the survey. So it's like, what's that frame of mind? So I then compare the two, and we look at whether there's significant gaps between any one of them. Now, the question isn't, is there a gap? It's a factor, but the real question is, are you happy about that? Are you okay with it? And some people will look at that and say, no, I've never been happy about that. And then you need to say, well, then you really need a new role, or maybe even an entirely different career. Let's explore that. If they say, actually, that's fine. I come home and I'm quite happy with my family connections. I get really filled up there, and that carries me through the next day. And that's great. Now, if they go on a business trip for a week and they don't have any family contact, then they'll probably find it a problem. But yes, absolutely. I loved your terminology. Fill up your tank in one place and then go traveling off to another. Yes, you can do that. You really can. The question is, are you happy about that? But if I see a major discrepancy between what's demanded here and demanded there, tends to be an indication that they're probably not in the right place, because their work, which obviously for most of us takes up a jolly lot of hours in the week, if that's not filling your tank, well, there's only so far you can go before you start feeling that depletion.
And I guess it works, well, at present, we come back to the idea that there's a lot of remote working going on. Okay, but you need the connection. So if you have that sense of being stuck, again, it's a time factor, I guess, the duration of where we are now, for example. And say, for example, you have to, your livelihood depends on the fact that you need to sit where you are and do whatever you're doing. That awareness of the other piece has to come into play so that you can fulfill the role you're in.
Yes.
And
yes.
Even if I use the word endure, because that's part of the resilience piece, is being able to endure the tough bits.
Yeah. So we fill ourselves up in different ways. I mean, I do have specific programs for each of these characters, where if somebody is weaker in any character and they say, no, actually, I'm not happy with where I am, I want to develop that character. If the desire is there, well, then there are specific things you can do in order to strengthen that. Just like if you've got certain muscles of your body that are not very large, not very well developed, you can go to a personal trainer and they'll give you the specific exercises necessary to build up that muscle mass. You've got the potential. You just need the willingness to be strong enough for you to endure the pain and the discomfort of the exercises. And it's exactly the same psychologically. You can become more warrior if you want to. You can become more lover if you want to. So we can work on each of those. And so, but that's in development of those areas that are weaker. If you are aware of where you are strong and those needs are not being met, well, then it is a case of adjusting your environment and your schedule in order to ensure that those needs are being met. So if you're having, if you are remote and you're not getting the people contact in the work situation, then plan that at your lunchtime, you will take a break, first point. And second of all, you use that break to connect with people, even if it is your best friend on the phone. And that's your regular thing. 3 times a week, I'm going to call Jenny and we're just going to have a blab and let it all out for 10 minutes. And even if it's just 10 minutes, it's like that will feed again that necessary connection that you have inside of you. Or you're going to write cards to 16 people or whatever it's going to be. It's like, how do we get that connection? What can you do? Even if, I mean, that's semi-remote even then. Or ideally, if you COVID allows, you knock on the neighbor's door and you have a 10-minute, 15-minute, half an hour, you lunch with them lunch with somebody for real, give yourself those breaks. And even if it's, I can't do this till the evening, just can't see anybody till the evening, well, fine, then make yourself an evening date. That will satisfy the lover. I had to work, quick example, I was working with a long distance runner recently. And I was actually there to help him with his business and did the archetypal model about how he's approaching his business. But then he said, hold on a minute, this is affecting me in my sport. And I said, how so? And he said, because on long distance running, I mean, these are like ultra marathons, you often come up alongside somebody and you run with them for a while. And he said, I always found it difficult if they just then go, okay, thanks, then bye, and they sprint off. It's just, and I said, well, that's the lover. You see how strong the lover is in you, and you hate the disconnection that causes. He says, yeah, I literally, my whole body feels depleted of energy. It's grief, but it drains energy. And guess what that did to his sporting performance? So we adjusted his mindset and said, how then can you speak to that lover to say, I know you're not getting your needs met now, but when you hit that finish line, so we tied the lover's reward to the finish line. As soon as you've hit that finish line, bit of warrior language, you will then be able to connect with all these people on Facebook. You can connect, you can phone them, you can talk to them, you can reach out. At the moment, yes, you're isolated. You're doing a long distance run in Norway. There's no one to talk to most of the time. And when you do talk to them, you feel the disconnect when they go off and they want to win the race. And where does that leave you? So it was really interesting how that actually is affecting his sporting performance on a situation I wasn't even aware of happening.
It's really fascinating to hear the way that you've applied the archetypes to all different aspects of one's life. And I think, Pat, it's been fabulous talking to you along these lines. Just on as we come towards the end, where do people find you, and what are your sort of points of contact for people to find you on the internet or otherwise, please?
Right. Well, thanks. So so I've got several books out on Amazon or wherever. If you Pad is hard to search for, but if you search for Team Me and Pad, you'll find a bunch of things out there, a load of YouTube videos and things. We soon have the Team Me Academy launching, where there's teachings and courses around this, but the simplest way to get into the academy is actually to do your own profile free online. So teamme.com will get you to the main website, but teamme.app will take people through to the app itself. Let me just quickly show that up on screen. So it takes just 90 seconds, and teamme.app, you need to register, but you can find out your primary 2 archetypal characters through this profiling method for free. And I will, as soon as the academy is being launched, and if it has been by the time you're listening to this, it'll automatically come with an invitation for you to access the first level of the academy. But this will teach you about yourself in a very summarized sort of fashion. Now, I also then take that data for personal coaching and for teams to be able to then help to explore those fuller profiles, some of which we saw examples of earlier, to give them more detailed insights. But that's a great place to start. So teamme.com to see the wider picture of Team Me, teamme.app for your free own profile. That's a great place to start, or toddle over to Amazon for the books, Team Me, How to Play Your Best Game in Life, and Team Guy, a special series of lessons for the gents in the world.
Excellent. And we will put all of these up in the links in the description for those who've missed that. Pat, it's been fabulous chatting with you. It's been really informative, and I'm sure others who are listening and watching would have gained huge insights just from this brief synopsis of what you do. It's been
fabulous. Thank you, Johnson. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, speak to you soon.
We will. Thank you. Bye-bye.